We've seen that a big part of our Kimura system is the use of the legs to put our opponent's hand behind the back in any situation where the arms prove to be inadequate. We've also seen the critical importance of controlling our opponent's head in any Kimura. There's a fascinating version of Kimura, often referred to as a reverse omoplata, but I think we'll soon see it actually has a lot more in common with Kimura than it does with omoplata, which embodies both of these principles. Controls the head in a very unusual fashion and involves a very direct use of the legs. Most of our use of the legs in Kimura began with a figure 4 hold with our hands on our opponent's arm, and then we switch to the legs. This one is something of an outlier. It starts with control of of my opponent's arm with my legs. At no point do I lock a figure 4 with my hands. Let's have a look at why this has more in common with a Kimura than it does with an omoplata. We'll have a training partner just lying down, and from this position, the general idea is that we're going to take our training partner's arm and put it into exactly the same position we would use for any conventional Kimura, but we have our legs holding the arm in place like so. The closer my foot goes to my training partner's elbow, the more control I have over the arm. If my arm extends too much and my training partner extends his arm, then there's a danger of the arm coming free. So we want to ensure that our foot comes back towards the elbow. The head control is done through the use of my arm reaching across my training partner's torso. So when my training partner goes to sit forward, he runs into the back of the arm. And now from a position like this, we can apply tremendous rotational pressure. It's very important how we apply this pressure. A common mistake that is made here is people will go straight forward towards their training partner's legs. That severely limits the amount of pressure that I can employ here. What I want to do in these situations is in fact to turn back towards my training partner's head. So my two knees come towards the mat and the turn is towards our training partner's head, and that's where we get tremendous pressure. If I just lean forward, very little pressure goes onto my training partner's arm. So the idea is to get our hips up off the mat and go for a rotational finish back towards our opponent. I'm just going to release his leg so you can see what would be the direction here. The direction would be a turn back to our knees towards the head. Now the question of course is, how are you going to get into this position? Because no one's just going to lie down and let you manhandle their arm into a position like this. That would be highly unlikely. So in fact, by far and away the most common and realistic method to enter into this position is against turtle position. Let's have a look at it from a situation where we have a training partner in turtle position. We'll move out to one side. As we so often do when we go into a basic crucifix attack, we'll start by placing our knee behind our training partner's tricep as a wedge. And then from the situation, as we gain control of our training partner's arm, we'll sweep our leg around the corner and hook into what would be a fairly standard back crucifix type situation. Okay. From here, we have to learn the skill of passing our opponent's arm from one leg to the other. I currently have Mateus's right arm trapped in my right leg. I need to pass his arm to my left leg. The question is, how are we going to do this? We're going to plant our hand down on the floor and we're going to start to apply a degree of pressure on our training partner's arm, just like so. As the pressure mounts, Mateus has to turn his thumb to relieve pressure, and when that happens, it catches in the second leg. Now from here, we start to align ourselves with our training partner. As we sit on our training partner's arm, it's quite difficult for him to withdraw the arm. You now have two great choices as to how you're going to initiate a roll that takes my opponent over into the Kimura. Both choices are excellent. One provides greater control of the arm, and the other provides greater control of the lower body to facilitate a roll. I'm going to demonstrate them both. I'll start with control of the arm. Most people, when they get to this position, feed their hand through on the near side and start reaching for their training partner's leg. Okay, that's good. We'll look at that soon. But what I often have my students do is reach through and grab their opponent's wrist as an alternative. So they bring the hand through and they grab the wrist, just in like so. Now from here, we come up into an inverted position. Look, Mateus, come back. From this position here, when he tries to pull his arm free, it's impossible because of my wrist grip. Okay, and we can use our second leg like a pendulum to force our training partner into a roll. Even if Mateus resists the roll and tries to make his body strong and resistant, from here the pendulum effect of my right leg will always start an action of putting his hand behind his back and taking him down to the mat. Now the danger is that Mateus will now roll with me and come up, and his head comes up, and he rotates before I can control his head. So it's important that as I roll, my head must stay in front of his head. And as a result, it's an easy thing for me to switch hands and bring my hand across his body. So now when his head tries to rise and follow me, it runs into my tricep, and we have the man well pinned. Let's go back through these details again. We'll start off again in a turtle situation. As always, we start by placing a wedge behind our training partner's tricep, and from here we go through and start to separate our training partner's hands. My leg comes around the corner and catches Mateus's arm just like so. From here, initially, we put pressure on our training partner's arm that motivates him to limp his arm free and feed it into my left leg. Now we start to turn the corner. I bring my hand to the near side, right down past his ear, and I go through and I grip my training partner at the wrist. From here, I come up into an inverted position. Even as Mateus tries to resist the turn, the action of my legs creates sufficient torque on his arm that it forces him into a roll. If he didn't roll with me, his arm would be severely hurt. Now from here, my hand goes across the body. It's very important I time this. I can't have his head get in front of mine, and now we have to go to something else. So we always want our head in front and our arm goes across. As soon as we get there, we plant our hand just in like so, and we start turning back towards our training partner's head for a strong finish. Let's have a look at that again. Starting off in turtle situation with our training partner, we go in behind, and as always we put that wedge in, and as a result I can step over the top and make a good catch on my training partner's arm. From here I start to lengthen the arm out. As I see my training partner resisting, we go through and make the catch. Now my hand goes all the way through, and we start a rolling turning action that sends my opponent over, and I ensure that I keep my head well forward. When he tries to follow, it's a very difficult thing. Now the action is one of dragging his knuckle down the mat, and then coming up to our knees, and then turning over so that one leg replaces the other. I come up, and there's the turn, and a very strong finish as a result. This is a fine example of using the power of the legs to enact what is essentially a Kimura lock. It's often interpreted as a reverse omoplata, but when you break down the actual breaking mechanics of the lock, you'll see it's much more in tune with a conventional Kimura. Like any Kimura, it has the principles of controlling the head. And like a good Kimura, it uses the legs as much as possible to enact breaking power. Now we just looked at a version where we controlled our training partner's wrist. The conventional version actually doesn't control the wrist. The conventional version actually controls your opponent's near side leg. Let's look at that. It's also a fine way to hit this move. From a situation where we have an opponent, just like before, we start off, we go in with that wedge, we pass our foot inside and hook onto our training partner's arm. We put pressure on the arm to motivate our opponent to make a switch, and we come back in like so. This time, instead of grabbing my training partner at the wrist, I'm going to go through and get a hook right there at my training partner's leg. Now, the disadvantage of this method is that if my opponent extends his arm, you could conceivably lose it here, okay? So it's very important that we keep our foot cocked back nice and tight in this situation. Now we use our other leg as a pendulum, and as a result we can throw our training partner forward. A good feature of this move is you have control of your opponent's leg, which strongly limits his ability to sit up. And as a result, we can pass the leg and post across the face, and then from here we come up into a very strong finishing position. Once again, we have a turtle situation. As always, from here we go through, put that wedge in place, the leg comes around the corner and makes that initial hook. From here we go through, sitting on the leg, we catch our training partner at the near side leg, and then from here we come up and we're in the perfect position to use our outside leg to start a rolling action that takes my opponent over and into a situation where I can pass the leg, post, and then from here I put the hand across the thighs, turn up, and we get a very strong finishing position. Now, let's look at some important details with this move. Very often, your opponent will figure out what's coming next. Once you've hit this move several times, it's pretty obvious when you initiate that rolling action what's going to come next. Many of your opponents will put their hands in defensive positions to prevent their hand going behind the back. As always, with any Kimura, if you cannot get the hand behind the back, you've got to trust in the strength of your legs. Okay, the good news is you have the entire rolling body weight of your body to separate his whatever defensive grip he has and get into a winning position. So we go in on our training partner and hook in the usual fashion. As we come around the corner and we go in to make our grips, our opponent will often put his hand inside his own thigh, for example, as a defensive measure. And as a result, we end up here. You feel you're being stymied. He's got his hand in a defensive position, tucked inside his own thigh. Okay? Remember, to force him to roll, I've got to get his hand behind the back. The bad news is he's preventing that by putting the hand in a sound defensive position. The good news is he's fighting the strength of your legs with his hands. So things should be very much in your favor. What we do is we use our outside leg as a pendulum, and that pendulum effect starts stressing our opponent's grip. Okay? Even just a light wave like so puts pressure on Mateus's hand. Mateus is going to grip as tight as he can now. What you're going to see is that there's tension, and then a good strong movement here quickly brings the hand out into a position where we can easily make a pass off. That pass off is his leg from left hand to right hand. As he tries to get up, the grip here makes it very, very difficult. Then my hand goes across. We heist, so our hips come off the floor. I put my hand across his thighs on the other side, and we're in a winning position as a result. I'm just going to show this from a different angle so that you see the finishing position in another light. Let's face this one. So, from here, we go in on our training partner. There's the wedging knee. There's the initial hook with our foot. And as a result, we're in a good position to start turning our training partner. As he goes through, we reach all the way through. He gets a defensive grip on his own leg. And from here, we come up into what should be a winning position. I use my outside leg as a pendulum. And as a result, we can quickly break his grip, put his hand behind the back, and we end up just like so. Now, let's just shift it on this little bit. When I come up for the break, initially he tries to get up with the head. It's blocked by my lat muscle and tricep. When we heist, we come up to our knees. My hand catches across his two hips. So when he tries to move around, it's a very difficult thing. And now from here, I just turn back towards the head and we get a very strong and powerful lock. This represents one of the clearest ways in which the intrinsic power of the legs can be used to enact very, very strong Kimura type pressure upon your opponent. Always remember the importance of head control. Always remember the faith you must have in the strength of your legs of your opponent's defensive arm. And as always, you're trying to get your opponent's hand behind the back to initiate that roll. You must believe in your leg's ability to do this and take him over into a strong finishing position. One potential problem with this move is you hit the move and your opponent's head goes in front of your head, and as a result he's able to set up before you can control the head. This will definitely make the Kimura impossible to finish. The good news is, however, it sets up a very nice entry into the back. So we'll look at a situation where Mateus is in turtle position, just like we were before. We go through, hook our training partner's arm, he transfers, and from here we hit the same roll. I'll demonstrate it off that wrist grip that I showed earlier. That has been my personal favorite way of doing this. And from here I'm a little bit late and Mateus's head passes mine. Okay, whenever we see this going on, we're immediately just going to take our two hands and just bring our hands back to our own body. As Mateus turns up towards me, our body goes across his and we lock back head and arm just like so. Wherever we end up now, even if Mateus comes up on top of me, in any fashion, you will always have an ability to go back into the back crucifix at a minimum. As we put pressure on our training partner's arm in the back crucifix position, he's going to have to raise his pelvis in order to relieve pressure on his arm. And of course, that's going to take us right back into the back position. So don't panic if you feel you've lost the head. It's not the end of the world. And in fact, it's often a very easy way to enter into your opponent's back. A big part of this video has been this statement that one of the great keys to understanding Kimura is the use of our legs. The moment you diminish the role of the legs in your Kimura attacks, you start getting into that very undesirable situation where it's just your two hands fighting against your opponent's two hands. Okay, and this is the age-old complaint about Kimura. It's a strong man's move. And as long as you make it a battle between your two hands and his two hands, they're absolutely right. It is a strong man's move. The idea is to take away that element in the Kimura and start to incorporate your legs as much as possible into the movement. Now, there are many different ways we can do this. We've seen a lot in this video so far. But one of the very best methods is to employ the use of triangle attacks upon your opponent's head and one arm in order to immobilize the head. Now, you guys know a big theme of this video has been the use of or the control rather of our opponent's head to solidify and accentuate our Kimura attacks. What I will often coach my students to do is to use a triangle, different forms of triangle, to immobilize your opponent's head and set up very strong Kimura attacks from bottom position. Traditionally, Kimura attacks from bottom position usually involve either half guard or close guard. And one of the great problems associated with these is they don't really do a good job of controlling the head. And as a result, you either fail with the move or the opponent rolls over and you have to follow and end up on top and continue the sequence. One of the absolute most high percentage ways to increase your success rate with Kimura from bottom position is to begin with a triangle. The moment you do this, you control your opponent's head and one arm. And as you know by now, controlling the head is a huge part of your success with Kimura. Essentially what we do is we create a hybrid between the triangle and the Kimura. Now when I say triangle, I'm not talking about triangle as a submission hold, as a stranglehold. It's just a method of controlling the head and the arm. Okay? The real goal here is the Kimura itself. Let's put this in a context. If I have an opponent and I'm working from bottom position, from a closed guard, if I just directly attack the Kimura from closed guard, you'll see that I have very little control of Mateus's head. And as a result, the head can rise, he can start posturing up, he can lock his hands together, he can put his hand inside his own thigh. As the head comes up, the chances of my success become less and less. If Mateus is smart, he will start to bring his head over my head. And when that happens, all the pressure comes on me, and the chances of me finishing a Kimura now go down to close to zero. Okay? It's because I had no control of my opponent's head from this position. My legs were around Mateus's waist, and as a result, his head was free to roam around and ultimately come over my head and kill the lock from bottom. That's why, or it's one of several reasons why, Kimura from closed guard has such a low percentage success rate in top-level competition. This can be greatly changed when we start to employ triangles to control our opponent's head and arm. Once this is done, the direct control over the head and arm offered by the triangle suddenly makes this a very high percentage move. You've got two great choices here. You can employ what we call a trap triangle, which is really just two crossed feet in a triangle position around the head and arm, or you can employ what we call a hantai senkaku. That's a triangle locked in what seems to be the wrong way in order to lock up your opponent's head and arm and create tremendous pressure. We use them both with a lot of success. Let's look first at the use of a trap triangle, where I simply cross my feet. First, we need some kind of setup. I'm going to show this from a seated butterfly guard because this happens to be my favorite general position to employ a triangle attack. So we're going to have a seated butterfly guard in our training partner. We're going to start off with one of our favorite grips for setting up a triangle attack. This is where I take Mateus's hand to the center line and I pass his hand to what we call a pronated grip, my palm facing away from me just like so. And as a result, my hand can come up to the elbow and I take his hand across to my hip. Everything closes around Mateus's arm, so when he goes to yank his arm free, it's exceptionally difficult. Even if he posts his other hand on my shoulder and pushes with all his might, it's a difficult grip to break away from. Okay, it's not because I'm strong or anything like that. It's just because I'm locking everything around his arm, and the one zone of weakness of my grip is being covered by my hip. So just mechanically, it's a very good way of closing a circuit around my training partner's wrist. So as Mateus goes to yank away, from here we're going to place our foot on our training partner's hip, and our second leg comes out, and as a result, we're able to lock just like so, around our training partner's head. Now, we don't have a true triangle yet. We haven't figure forward our legs. This is what we call a trap triangle, where my ankles are crossed, just like so, kind of like a closed guard. But instead of being locked around his waist, like a closed guard, it's locked around his head and one arm, like a triangle. Okay, so we have a trapping effect of a triangle without the actual strangulation. Now, from here, when Mateus goes to yank away, my knees pulling into my chest make it difficult for him to posture up in the usual kind of postural escapes from a triangle. From Mateus's perspective, if his arm starts moving across the body, he's setting himself up to be strangled. So most of your opponents here are going to be trying to bring the arm in this direction and the head going up. Okay, whether his arm goes like so or whether it stays in the middle, I don't really care. What I do care about is bringing my opponent's head down in this direction and forcing his hand outwards, like so. So we're going to get a 2-on-1 grip on our training partner's wrist. Even as Mateus makes his arm strong and resistant, I'm going to focus on using my hips as a lever to get his hand to the outside. Once we get in here, I take my thumb and I put it underneath my training partner's wrist, just like so. Now, the most important thing, we've got to control our training partner's head, and I'm going to turn off Mateus's shoulder. I'm going to invert my right knee so that my right foot points up at the ceiling. I don't want my foot pointing down at the floor here. I want to turn off his shoulders and hips, and as a result, when I go to lock my feet over the other side, when Mateus goes to posture up now, it's a very difficult thing. And it's relatively simple for us now to go through and lock a nice Kimura. From this position, we're lined up right on our training partner's power line. His two shoulders are in a straight line. His elbow comes up to my armpit. When he tries to straighten out his arm, etc., it's so difficult. And we employ a pulling effect to finish the lock. Again, the key element is that my knee inverts. I'll demonstrate it from the other side so you can see that inverted knee more clearly. We start off here, an opponent in a seated butterfly guard. First things first, we always take the hand to the center line. Then we take a pronated grip. We go in on our training partner and connect everything to the hip. When Mateus goes to yank away, it's a very difficult thing. As a result, we can quickly pull our training partner into this trap triangle. Even if Mateus keeps his hand glued to my chest here, it's very, very easy for me to put two thumbs underneath and push the wrist to the outside. As a result, from here, we can start to turn the corner on our training partner. Now we catch the head, and from here, I shimmy my hips so that my knee points down to the ceiling. Down to the floor. This is the inverted knee. And as a result, when we lock our feet, when he tries to posture up, etc., it's a very difficult thing. Now we go through, we lock up. You'll see now that Mateus's left shoulder, right shoulder, elbow, and my head are all in a straight line. As a result, we have that perfect bottom power line that we're always looking for. And from here, we get very, very strong finishes as a result. Now, that's the finish. What I need you to have is a large set of effective ways to get into this position. Let's go through my favorite grips in just a short, concise sequence and show how from any seated butterfly guard we should be able to fire our legs into this trap triangle position and then start working our Kimura game. We just looked at a situation where Mateus had hands up in front of us. We were in a hand fight situation, and we passed the hand across and we use a pronated grip. And as a result, we connect to the hip and get good connection. Okay, that's probably all around my favorite grip to attack triangles from a seated guard, but it's not the only one. Another one I favor a lot is to get a hold of my training partner's elbow, just like so. I'm going to pull the elbow towards my center line, and my hand comes up, 5 fingers like so, and I just hug hand to wrist, and I just hug his knuckles to my chest like so. When Mateus goes to yank his arm out, again, it's shockingly difficult. You've got this very, very strong supinated grip. Instead of a pronated grip, palm away, we're going supinated, hand back towards my own chest. Instead of putting his hand in my hip to lock it in place, I lock it on my sternum. When he goes to yank out, again, very, very difficult. This creates a situation where we can easily go into a trap triangle, force the hand to the outside, and as always from here, we invert the legs, knee down towards the floor, and we line up on the power line, and once again, we're ready to go. So this is a nice variation of the 2-on-1. The first one was a pronated 2-on-1. We had palm away. Then we looked at the idea of a supinated 2-on-1, palm towards me. Now let's look at situations where my opponent starts putting a grip on me. First grip we'll look at is a collar tie. Not a bad grip for Mateus to use, because if he pushes on my knees here, he can start clearing my legs up to the side and passing my guard. So it's actually a very good grip for him to start using. So when I see someone take this grip, we're going to take what we call an over tie. I will always put my knee down on the floor. If my knee is up and Mateus pushes, definitely a problem. So we drop. If he's got collar tie right, I put my right knee down. Now from here I go over tie, just like so. My hand comes through and holds under the elbow. When Mateus goes to yank his arm out, it's almost impossible. And as a result, I can put a foot on the hip, hold tight to the knee. From here I just put my foot all the way through and we lock that same trap triangle. As always from this position, we clear everything out to the side. As always, we invert the knee, we lock a trap triangle, and from this position, everything comes up to the power line and we're ready to finish. Another very common form of grip sequence here is for my opponent to take an inside bicep tie where he controls the inside of the biceps. When we see this, we're just going to hold here at the elbow. My second hand comes over and chops into my training partner's elbow pit, just like so. When Mateus goes to yank out, it's a shockingly strong grip to break. So from a situation where we start off grappling here, I come in, I hold tricep and elbow. He goes to yank out, very, very difficult indeed. Now from here, as always, we kick in over the top and lock. As always, we pass the wrist to the outside. Hand comes around the corner, inverting the knee, locking ankles, knees over the head, and as a result, we're right on the power line and ready to attack. Sometimes in situations like this, I'll just hit elbow post and wrist. From here, I control the elbow post, like so, and I control a wrist. And from this initial position, we put feet on the hips, etc., and I just kick all the way up and drag the man forward. And as always, we pass the wrist to the outside. This hand pass starts with right hand and passes to left hand. As a result, we can shimmy, turn, lock, and everything comes up to the power line for our finish. Simple gripping sequences like this enable us in a seated guard situation to get easily into this trap triangle position. From the trap triangle, it's a simple thing to invert the knee and put on very, very strong Kimura pressure. The beauty of this position is it puts you directly on the power line, the preferred breaking position from bottom position. Secondly, it gives direct control of your opponent's head, as opposed to closed guard where there's minimal control of the head and your opponent can easily posture up and get away from you. This is what makes this Kimura sequence on bottom so effective. And the good news, of course, is it's very much in accordance with all the general principles we use in the Kimura system. The idea of controlling the head, the idea of doing our breaking from a specified power line, and mechanically getting the arm into a good bent position to work from. If we can do these things, your finishing percentage from bottom position will go up drastically. Now, I said earlier, there's two ways we employ this move. One is with what we call a trap triangle, where we simply cross our ankles, and the other is where we actually lock a real figure four triangle. But where we do this is different. Instead of locking to strangle someone, we're looking to lock up a figure four triangle to control their head and arm. So we employ what we call hantai senkaku. This is a triangle locked what appears to be the wrong way. There's no intention to strangle, it's just to control the head and the arm. Let's have a look at this. From any one of those grip fighting sequences that we just saw, we go in on our training partner and we pull ourselves into a trap triangle situation. This time, as we force the hand to the outside, we're going to go through and get a hold of our training partner's head and we're going to shimmy the other way. Instead of inverting my right knee and shifting my hips out left, I'm going to shift my hips out right. And I'm going to physically grab my own shin and pull my ankle forwards over my training partner's shoulder. As a result, we can very easily lock our triangle. You will notice that my triangle is locked with my heel in front of the shoulder. That's an extremely important detail. If my heel locks behind the shoulder, my opponent can still posture up and I can still lose the move. It's extremely important that my heel be brought in front of the shoulder so that when we lock the figure of four, the head is truly controlled. Now, here's another important detail. Once you've made that contact, I have to be able to expose my opponent's wrist. And there's a problem here. When my opponent puts the hand behind, he hides his wrist, but I need that wrist. The question is, how are you going to get it? The good news is, there's a very simple method that works like a charm. I'll demonstrate it facing this way so you can see this detail. We start off with our training partner using any one of those grip sequences that we saw earlier. I'll demonstrate my favorite one, the pronated grip, elbow 2-on-1. We've seen that we draw the man in and we lock an initial trap triangle. That's just crossed ankles around our opponent's head and one arm. We've seen that from this situation, we'll often have an opponent who either puts his hand here or we force it there. Either one is fine. We saw that we can control the head, and from this situation, we're going to focus on turning our hips and locking our own shin and drawing the heel in front of his shoulder. Very important. It's got to be in front. So that when we lock the triangle, you've got a true bite over the head and shoulder that locks them in place. Because there's no intention to actually strangle your opponent from here, you don't have to worry about the usual things that we do with triangles. You don't have to make the shoulder, you don't have to cover the shoulder with your leg or any of these other things. Now, what I do need to do is expose my training partner's wrist. If he hides the wrist from me, there's a simple trick to get this done. I put the points of my shoulders on the mat. Points of shoulders and elbows together go to the mat. So instead of reaching forward, as we often would for a triangle, we go back. Everything goes back to the floor. Shoulders and elbows together. As the shoulders and elbows go back together, we're just going to take our hips up to the ceiling, and as a result, we expose our training partner's wrist. We go in with a thumb and lock in just like so. Once you've got the thumb, then you go right back in the same direction you just came from. And as a result, we get a nice bend in the arm, and we lock up the figure of 4. When Mateus goes to move his head to extricate himself, it's almost impossible. You have tremendous ability now to bring his elbow up to your armpit. The further his elbow from my right armpit, the less effective I'm going to be. So everything gets drawn up to the armpit, and from here, we can get tremendous pressure. Why is it such an efficient break? Because the head can't move. Remember, if Mateus's head can move, that's when Kimura's become a problem. But the moment we lock up in this situation and have a tight triangle locked in front of his shoulder, head movement becomes extraordinarily difficult. And from here, you can really get strong finishes. Let's have a look at this sequence again. As we go in on our training partner, we get that initial elbow 2-on-1. We throw our legs over the top, just like this. Now, initially, we lock a trap triangle. We force the hand to the outside, and we go to control our training partner's head. From here, we shimmy, and we get a hold of our own ankle, so that when we lock the figure of 4, it locks in front of his shoulder. Now, so important to expose our training partner's wrist. Everything goes backwards, the opposite direction it would for a triangle stranglehold. And as a result, his wrist comes straight to my thumb. Now from here, I come back, and we've got the exposed arm. I take his elbow up to my armpit to put everything onto the bottom power line. And as a result, we can get a break in a matter of millimeters. This was the basic sequence that was used by Ethan Kralenston in the ADCC trials to enact one of the most powerful Kimura breaks the grappling world's ever seen from bottom position. The reason why the break was so powerful is because this position, this figure 4 Hantai Senkaku, or wrong way triangle, positions you precisely on the power line from bottom position. In addition, it absolutely locks your opponent's head and shoulders down, which makes the usual defensive movements of Kimura almost impossible. As a result, there's a huge braking pressure which builds up rapidly on the elbow and creates very dramatic results. Anyone who follows the exploits of my students will quickly understand one thing. Whenever it comes to a given finishing hold, I always encourage my students to have alternatives within that hold. So for example, in heel hooking, we saw when we looked at the leg system, and you can see this looking at any highlight reel of any one of my students, they don't just use one heel hook, they use a multiplicity of heel hooks to get the job done. There's a simple reason for this. In any given lock, whether it be a heel hook, an armbar, a kimura, or what have you, there's always small contingencies that occur as you try to employ a lock that make a difference. If you have a multiplicity of locks within one system, you will be able to cover different contingencies much, much better than someone who just has one lock that they work with. for this reason, it's extremely important that if you work with a given lock, say Kimura, armbar, heel hook, etc., that you have different varieties to match the various contingencies you find yourself in. Now, we could sit here all day and show you a huge number of different Kimura variations, but there are 5 that my students use, which stem from a basic figure 4 Kimura, and there is a 6th one which is unique amongst the Kimuras because it doesn't stem from a figure 4 Kimura. It is, in my opinion, still a Kimura. Some people would say it's an omoplata, but it has more characteristics in common with the Kimura, I believe. Let's have a look at these now, just so that you have just a clear sense of what are these different moves and how we use them. Let's start with the father of them all, the basic figure 4 Kimura. Okay, if I have a training partner who's down, doesn't matter where we are from when I talk about a figure 4 Kimura, this is the Kimura that we all know and love, okay? When we lock up on our training partner and we have 2 hands working, we have a push hand at the wrist, we have a pull hand at my own wrist, and from here we work like so. Regardless of whether I'm working from top, bottom position, it doesn't matter, okay? So this would be a classic figure 4 Kimura, okay? This stands in contrast to a bicep figure 4, okay? In a bicep figure 4, we switch from having a push hand to going through and locking like so, okay? So we still have a figure 4 grip, but we no longer have a push hand on the wrist and a pull hand on our own wrist. Instead, everything changes as we go into a position where my hand goes to my training partner's shoulder and my other hand goes to my own shoulder. We still have a Kimura action on our training partner's arm. Okay, we can still enact braking pressure in different ways now. But you'll see that the grip that I'm employing is significantly different. Okay. Now, we know that a big part of what we do in our Kimura system is try to employ the legs whenever we feel we can't get the hand quickly and efficiently behind the back. So another form of Kimura that we often make use of is the so-called cross Kimura, where from a conventional figure 4 Kimura hand grip, we start to employ our legs by taking our legs across our training partner's body like so. We now have 2 legs across our training partner's body, and from here, wherever we go, I'm demonstrating it going backwards towards the floor. We now have 2 legs across the body. You can have locked feet or unlocked feet, doesn't matter. And from here, we can get very, very strong breaks indeed, using the Kimura reinforced by the legs. So this would be a good example of a cross Kimura. Now, another form of Kimura is really a hybrid between an omoplata and a Kimura. We often jokingly refer to this one as a Kimura plata. It's somewhere between Kimura and omoplata. It's famously used by a very talented, I believe he's Norwegian athlete, and often named after him, a Tarika plata. The idea behind this is you start with a figure 4 grip, and from this position, typically it's done just by throwing the leg over. I'll show you the variation which I coach to my students. It's a little different. What we do is we start with a partial figure 4, and I put my hand flat on my training partner's back. This exposes more hip for me to step over. Okay, so the way I do it, a little different. We start with a basic figure 4 grip and we modify it, and we go short and we put the hand flat on our training partner's back. This greatly facilitates the action if you're less flexible, for example, you've just had a hip replacement like me, and you throw your leg much more easily now into the lock. Okay, from this position, we start the action of putting our head over our own hand and turning our hips out to the side. As my right leg advances forward and my left leg comes around, our hips go across his hips and we get a very strong finish. So classically, what many people call a Tarika plata begins with a figure 4 grip and I just throw my leg over. We do things slightly differently. We come through, you put the hand on the back. Okay, and this creates more space for our legs to travel through. It also makes a more sure grip and prevents any kind of hand slippage at the last minute. Now from here, I just throw my leg across and everything tucks into the crook of my knee. Now, as we move out to the side, we come through and we take our left hip all the way through onto our left buttock. So you should always have the sensation of falling off your opponent. And from this position, we get strong pulling pressure and a very strong finish indeed. Now, these are some of the main Kimuras we use. There's also another one we use on occasion, which has a very specific application. This is one-handed Kimuras, and these two can be a very, very powerful addition to your Kimura arsenal. We know that we like to employ what we call the power line, where we take our head to our opponent's far hip and our hips to his near shoulder, so that we form a diagonal line from one hip across to the near shoulder, like so. And our body wants to be aligned on that power line. A lot of your opponents know this, and say they will often employ an ingenious tactic to stop you getting to the power line. They will overwrap your hips. So when you get a Kimura across side, they will reach over your hip and hug your hip. And as a result, I can no longer cover my opponent's head. We know that in a classic Kimura, I'm supposed to step over my training partner's head to control the head. Okay? So Mateus intelligently overwraps my hip to prevent me from doing this. In these situations, we will often hit a one-handed Kimura. I will take what would be my pulling hand and come through, and I will take my training partner all the way down here at the blade of his hand. Don't grab his wrist, grab the blade of his hand, just like so. Okay? Now, with this one-handed grip in place, I'm going to come down, and as Mateus tries to stop my hips coming around by overwrapping, reaching around my lower back and holding tight, I'm going to put my hand down here as a blocker by his hip, just like so. Now, even as he wraps his arm around my waist, I'm just going to come up in tripod, and I'm going to walk all the way around until my ear touches his hip. And then from here, I start an action of driving forward. Look how the legs are employed by coming around the corner like so, and then we just rotate all the way through. So as my ear goes across Mateus's stomach, that's where we get tremendous pressure. Okay, my legs are employed because I have a drive leg pushing off the mat, and as we go forward, we get a very, very strong finish indeed. So as we start off with a basic figure four, Mateus stops me from getting to the power line by overwrapping my hip. So I come through and I grip the blade of the hand just like so. From here, we come up, we block our training partner's hip. Even as he tries to stop me with his right arm, I just walk all the way around. I put my ear close to his belly button, and we just drive forward. And we get tremendous breaking pressure with just one hand. It's a bit of an illusion because it looks like I'm breaking with one hand, but really you can see it's the legs and the rotation which does the breaking. The one hand is just a means of connecting myself to his arm. They form a family of Kimuras where we can employ tremendous mechanical leverage to get great results. And those 5 Kimuras tend to cover each other very well. Whenever one of them fails, another one will step up to the plate and take over. When we employ this multiplicity of Kimuras, you can break through very strong defenses, where if you only had one method of getting through, it might be very difficult indeed. Remember, always have more than one way of expressing the given move you're working with. That's the only way to cover contingencies. There is a 6th Kimura that we use, which doesn't stem from an initial figure 4 grip. All the Kimuras we looked at so far began with this movement, the classic figure 4. Okay, the one we're looking at now does not. It starts entirely with the legs, and typically it's done from turtle position, and this is often referred to as a reverse omoplata, but we'll soon see it actually has a little more in common with a Kimura. From the situation, my knee comes in and wedges on my training partner. We lock and get our opponent's arm locked in place, and from here we pass the arm across to the other side. Bunch of ways we can work here. We can grab our training partner's wrist. We can grab a hold of his leg, and from the situation, I put his hand behind his back. We rotate through on our training partner and send the man across. And from here, control our training partner. We come up to our knees, catch the hips, and then rotate back. And you can see we have the same kind of Kimura pressure as you would expect, only it's done with the legs instead. When we use these 6 Kimuras as a team, as it were, you can break through resistance at all levels to the Kimura, whether it be in the finishing position or whether it be in the entry to the finishing position. One of those 6 will be appropriate. Is this the limit of Kimura? Absolutely not. There are many other versions of Kimura which are fascinating. One which I've always enjoys is Bahata Plata, and this is a Kimura using the legs, an ingenious one which can be used quite successfully. There are many others in addition to that, but as far as my own teaching goes and the system that I teach to my students, we use these 6. They're the ones which we employ. And as a general rule, we've found other varieties were either unnecessary or were better covered by either other moves or other Kimuras. And as a result, we more or less stick to these 6 methods of working. We looked at the idea of a roll-through Kimura. Now, this is an absolutely crucial skill that you develop, okay? No matter how much you try to control your opponent's head when you're finishing Kimuras from side control top, there's always going to come that day you can't control your opponent's head. And as a result, you're going to have to roll through and have absolute faith in your ability to roll anyone over, regardless of size, provided you can keep their hand behind the back. Okay, and we've already seen the move, the roll through, but now we have to go over an important detail. Whenever I coach people rolling through, often just the move itself as a drill, it's very easy for them to learn. But when it's time to go live with a resisting opponent, they often get a disappointing result. Let's have a look at the roll through itself, just remind you what is a roll through with a Kimura, and then look at what can make things go wrong when you're actually trying to employ this on a resisting person. So Mateus is going to be bottom side control, and we've done a good job securing the wrist. You've got the Kimura, and unfortunately, however, you failed to control the head, either because he's very good on bottom, knows what he needs to do, or because maybe you made a slight boo-boo, and we'll do better next time. So from here, I start putting pressure on Mateus, and he sits up on me. Okay, so there's no way now I'm going to be able to step over the head. At this point, we have to start to acknowledge what's good and what's bad about the situation. What's bad is the head is completely uncontrolled, and there's a very good chance now I'm going to end up going backwards. Okay, so that's the bad part. The good part is you still got his hand behind the back. And as I've been trying to communicate to you through this video, as long as you have his hand behind his back, you own him. Okay? It looks like chaos right now, but you have to trust me on this. It's still chaos, which is guided by you. For one simple reason, you still have his hand behind the back. Whenever I see Mateus coming up like this, I don't want to go back in a straight line so much as I want to go forwards in a roll, so that we end up in a situation where he's following us. Now, even though I'm now technically bottom side control, I'm still in the driver's seat for the simple reason that I still have Mateus's hand behind his back. If Mateus just froze right where he was and refused to move, you could technically just break his arm right here. But of course, he would have to be very naive for that to happen. Mateus can still hit a forward roll. Now this is where things go wrong. He hits the forward roll, and I come up too slowly. So what happened? I lost contact with my hips to his stomach. So as Mateus rolls, he comes up with his head into a seated position, and now you're chasing too late, too late, too late. He turns and faces you, he pulls his arm free, and you've lost a golden opportunity. He's now squared up to you, and he's on top. What went wrong? What went wrong is you had the hand behind the back, you rolled him through, that was all good. But when he rolled through, space developed between you and him. You didn't time the movement of your hips to follow his roll. Okay, this is something you must work as you drill this move. This will determine the difference between your ability to put someone under pressure versus your ability to actually go through all the way and finish them. So, what should we be doing here? When I see the situation is starting to deteriorate and he's coming up, first I pitch across his body. You can see that my hips are on top of Mateus's hips. There is direct contact, my hips to his. As we come up and go through the roll, I have to maintain this contact. Watch my right leg. As I roll Mateus through, my right leg connects to him. So that as we land with me in perfect braking position, right on the power line. And from here, we go through for the finish. Okay? Your quadricep must maintain contact with your opponent's stomach and abdominals. If contact is lost, if your opponent is moving quickly and with determination, he will roll through and away from you. As long as your quadricep is connected to his stomach, he will never get away. You will always cover the head, and you will go from chaos to a very controlling and powerful victory. Let's have a look at this again. We have our training partner. We've done a good job of securing an initial Kimura in like so. From here, unfortunately, we're losing control of the situation. We roll across his body. Watch my right leg. Even as he's rolling, I'm already following, so that by the time he comes through, we end up in a perfect braking position, right on the power line, ready to go. I'm just going to demonstrate a failed attempt again, so you can clearly see the difference between the two. This time, as we take Mateus over with the roll, you can see my right leg fails to move with his, space develops, and now we both come up together. It's an uncontrolled situation. He turns rapidly up to his knees, and now I've got to go back to guard, and the situation is lost. One more time, this time the correct application of the move. We go through on our training partner. We hit the initial roll. As we come up, look how my right leg follows my opponent, so that even as we come up into a finishing position, the head is now controlled, and we've gone from a situation where I was losing control of my opponent to one where you've gained full control of the head, and now you've got an excellent opportunity to put him away with Kimura. This is the idea of timing the roll through. You must follow his movement and remain hip to hip in order to go from a chaotic, uncontrolled Kimura situation to one where you have all the things you need for success. Hand behind the back, full control of your opponent's head, and your legs engaged in the Kimura. Let's talk about the standard side control Kimura with a figure 4 grip on our training partner's arm, the one we all get introduced to when we first start off Kimura study, and talk about the incredibly important role of our elbow as a wedge at our training partner's hip. If we have a training partner in side control bottom, and we initially have him up on his side in a so-called dorsal situation, just like so, when we go to convert this position into an attacking Kimura, a very, very common mistake I see people make is they lead with the hands. What does that mean to say that? I take my opponent's hand, I put it successfully behind the back, and they lead with the hands. If my opponent turns vigorously to his left, that means now I will tend to face plant, and my head will go down to the floor, the exact opposite of what I want. Okay, so again, if I have my opponent here like so, and I put the hand behind the back and I push with my hands to the floor and he turns rapidly in that direction, you tend to go into uncontrolled situations where you face plant on the floor. Okay, now face planting is not only an unpleasant thing, it's also mechanically very inefficient. It puts your head in a very poor position to exert leverage upon his arm. So we never lead with the hands, we lead with the elbow. Okay, when I go over the top and put my opponent's hand behind the back, I never go with the hands to the floor. I go with the elbow to the floor. That ensures that my head never goes down to the mat. Now when my opponent goes to turn vigorously to his left, your elbow is like a wedge on his hips, and that makes it very easy for me now to step over my training partner's head and now split my legs, and from here we have the perfect braking position. Okay, so we've got a very useful and important general rule from a dorsal situation Kimura where we want to convert it into a side Kimura. You lead with the elbow, not with the hands. So once again, here's the problem. I want to get his hand into a position where I can effect a break. If I foolishly lead with the hands, then you tend to lose control of the situation. Your head goes out of position. So always in these situations, once I get the hand behind the back, I rotate and turn and I lead with the elbow. The elbow goes down to the floor. Now when he turns vigorously to his left, I don't move. I'm stuck. As a result, when we step over, your elbow is wedged to your opponent's hips. Okay, when he tries to pull his arm free, tries to move his hips and shrimp left and right, he's all stuck in by my hip pressure and my good elbow position. Now as I walk across my opponent's body, we get tremendous braking pressure. And at no point do we expose ourselves to our opponent's defensive movements, twisting, turning left and right. Now, one of the great themes of this instructional video has been the idea that what essentially creates the direction of our Kimura system is the position of our opponent's hand. Is it in front of the body or is it behind the back? And we've seen if it goes behind the back, typically we go straight for our finishes and we actually finish with Kimura as a submission hold. If the hand stays in front, typically we tend to use Kimura as a controlling method of pinning our opponent's arm and setting up other positions, other submissions, or incorporating the legs to actually force it behind the back. A truly useful addition to your Kimura arsenal, and which generates back exposure and allows you to switch from Kimura system to back system, is the head and arm Kimura. We often make use of this move when we feel we cannot physically get our opponent's hand behind the back. It's incredibly simple to use and stunningly effective. It's absolutely one of the most important additions to your overall Kimura game. We'll look at it in a side situation where I have Mateus. We'll face this way, Mateus. We have Mateus controlled in a side situation just like so. Okay, we've got a basic Kimura on our training partner, and for whatever reason we've come to the conclusion that we will not be able to put it behind his back. It might be because we're not controlling the head properly. He might just have a death grip with his two hands and we feel we can't separate them no matter how hard we try, no matter what methods we use to try and break the grips apart. We feel we're stalled out here, and perhaps we're worried about trying to step over into Kimuras using the legs. Maybe our flexibility is not what it should be, or what have you, and we're looking for other alternatives. Well, one great one here is to switch off to a head and arm Kimura. So from a situation where I just have the arm controlled, I'm going to take my pulling hand and I'm going to lock around and take a reverse false grip just like so. Okay. As a result, I can generate pressure where my shoulder goes directly behind my training partner's elbow. The further my shoulder from Mateus's elbow, the more easy it is for him to turn his elbow back in and slip inside my arm. Okay. So I want to make sure here that I drive everything forward. I put my hand on the floor and I start to rotate around and I put my bicep behind his head. Now I start driving forward towards the opposite elbow, and as a result we can lock a Kimura that now incorporates his head as well as the arm. Okay, this makes it significantly more difficult for Mateus to turn into me. When he tries to turn into me, I just extend the elbow forward and I keep my head in front of his head. If I sit back on my heels, now Mateus can turn into me and I can lose the head. So the whole thing is we bring our elbow forward and my head forward. So when he goes to turn back in, it's very, very difficult indeed. As a result, we can easily sit behind our training partner. Even if he's got his legs up defensively, it means nothing. We can always shift our weight and pass our foot all the way through and make a hook on our training partner's far hip. Now we lift and we bring the second leg out, so we create what we call unweighted legs, where my 2 feet are unweighted. Now, even when he locks his hands tight defensively, it means nothing. We can always put our feet around his wrist and separate his hands and put our foot into the armpit. From this position, we're going to bring our training partner's hand overhead and we're going to lock Ushiro Senkaku, just like so. Now, it looks like we've got a stranglehold, but you can soon see we've also got something else. This is also a devastating Kimura position. I put his knuckles outside my quadricep, and from here we lift the elbow for a very strong Kimura finish. Because the head can't move, again, the legs have been employed for the Kimura has a much greater braking effect in a much smaller distance. Okay, so once again we start off with a Kimura which has been stalled, and we're no longer confident we can either use our legs to enact the Kimura or separate the hands and get the hand behind the back. So instead we start this action of turning. We put our bicep in behind and we lock up a figure of 4, just like so, and sit down to the mat. From this position we pass our foot across, second leg comes in, and we have 2 unweighted feet. So even as Mateus locks his hands as tight as he can in this situation, we use now the strength of our legs to separate his hands. Now, as always from here, we want to incorporate our legs as part of the Kimura lock, so we fall over to our side, we lock the figure of 4, and from here we have essentially a trimura, half triangle, half Kimura. I put my hands outside my training partner's quadricep, and from here we get very strong Kimura attacks. This is a fascinating sequence because it involves essentially The idea of starting with a failed Kimura, you couldn't get the hand behind the back, couldn't switch off to something else. You made a switch to a head and arm Kimura, and as a result you could go into the back system. From the back system we locked up a triangle. You could have finished with a stranglehold, but you took it back to the Kimura. And of course it's a Kimura with the head and arm controlled by your legs. So we're doing all those things that we like all those themes that we like to push in our Kimura system. Using your legs to enact breaking power, controlling your opponent's head. These are the keynote themes of the system, and here you get to see them in operation where you couldn't get a conventional Kimura to work, and you got an unconventional one utilizing the legs from the back. Here we are working our grip entries into Trimura. The grip entry we're about to look at now is, without any question, my personal favorite method of controlling for many forms of attack, including this hybrid half Kimura, half triangle. I use this to enter legs, triangles themselves, Trimura. It's such a versatile, useful grip. I'm demonstrating here that conventional Kimura attacks from a closed guard can be very difficult to finish in comparison to those from a trap triangle. The trap triangle directly influences your opponent's head. It gives tremendous control of the head, unlike a closed guard. And as a result, regardless of our leg configuration, whether it be a trap triangle or a full figure of four, you're going to have a lot more success from bottom position by locking up and controlling the head and the arm rather than just a simple closed guard. One of our favorite ways of entering into these situations is to take a seated position, and from here take a pronated grip on our opponent's wrist. This is going to involve a pass off. I need to take my opponent's hand towards the center line, and that will expose his wrist to my right hand. So my left hand passes his wrist to the right hand. My palm is facing away, so it's a pronated grip. I don't want to just reach naively with my right hand. I want to use this pass off method where left passes his wrist to the right. Now we go into an elbow 2-on-1. The danger is that my opponent will start to pull his hand down and away, so I place his hand across my center line on my hip and trap the hand against the hip. As a result, you have a completely isolated arm, which makes it easy to kick the legs over and go into a trap triangle. Once you get control of the head, we want to be pulling in with our knees. You could go for a strangulation here, of course, but your opponent will often force his arm to the outside to make strangulation difficult. This is exactly the situation where we're going to use the Trimura, the half Kimura, half triangle. We force the hand to the outside, taking it further out than your opponent wanted it to go, and then we control wrist and elbow, bringing the elbow down towards our sternum. From here, it's a matter of pulling in with the knees and locking the Kimura. Very often in these situations, it helps to invert our right knee and point the foot up at the ceiling and the knee down at the mat. That makes for a better turn and a better angle. My ankles cross in this position, and from here we draw our training partner's elbow up to the shoulder line to create the bottom power line effect. My head, his elbow, and both his shoulders are in a straight line. That's the perfect breaking position. Notice how my right foot points directly up to the ceiling and my right knee points directly down to the mat. That inverted knee position is what we're looking for. That's why Brian Glick is having a very hard time bringing his head up. Because we control the head very effectively with our legs, it's very, very easy to get strong finishes here. This idea of passing the hand across the center line is very important in practice. It's unrealistic to think you're just going to be able to reach across with your right hand and grab the wrist. That pass off from left to right makes for a successful application of the move. Now look how I lock his hand into my hip, so when my opponent goes to pull away, it won't be easy. Everything's coming forward, head and shoulders forward. As we kick over, initially our feet will lock. You could go straight for a triangle here, but of course your opponent postures up, takes the hand to the outside to prevent the strangle. That's where the Kimura danger kicks in. We push the hand to the outside, we pull down so that the elbow comes down to my sternum. That brings his head down. Now we need to lock it down. So from here, I point my right knee down to the floor, my right foot up to the ceiling, and when we lock in this position, you will see my head, his elbow, and both shoulders are in a straight line. That's the perfect breaking position to work from. Because the head is so heavily controlled, the elbow will break in a very short space. Let's bring Nicky Ryan into the picture, and he will work with Brian Glick. As he takes the grips, I just want to point out to you pictorially the idea of the bottom power line. Nicky looks way too heavy in this situation. As Nicky Ryan throws his legs into position, let's study, as he inverts his knee, the position of his head, Brian Glick's elbow, and both of Brian Glick's shoulders. You'll see that they follow a straight line. The belt covers all four: Nicky Ryan's head, Brian Glick's elbow, and both of Brian Glick's shoulders. When we're lined up in this fashion, we're bound to be successful. If Nicky's head is offline, he's much less liable to be successful. But here he's moved back onto the bottom power line, and it's going to create a very strong lock indeed.